Powerful people are rarely loud. That is the first lesson of The Godfather. In a world full of shouting, ego, and impulsive decisions, Vito Corleone moves differently. He speaks softly, he listens carefully, he reacts slowly. And somehow, everyone fears him. That is real power. Not emotional reactions. Not constant aggression. Control. Most people think strength is dominance. They think the strongest person in the room is the loudest one, the most aggressive one, the one demanding attention. But The Godfather teaches the opposite. Real power is calm. Because calm people think clearly. And clear thinking changes outcomes. Vito Corleone understands something most people never learn. Emotion makes people predictable. That is why he never rushes decisions. He understands that anger creates mistakes, fear creates weakness, and ego blinds judgment. Patience protects power. That lesson becomes even clearer through Michael Corleone. At the beginning of the story, Michael wants distance from the family business. He believes he can live a separate life, disconnected from violence and power. But life changes him. Slowly. Quietly. One decision at a time. That transformation is what makes the story unforgettable. Because Michael does not become powerful overnight. He evolves under pressure. Circumstances force him to think differently, move differently, and eventually become someone completely new. That is how power usually develops in real life too. Not suddenly. Gradually. Responsibility changes people. Pressure sharpens them. Loss hardens them. And over time, the person who once looked calm and innocent becomes someone capable of carrying enormous weight without showing emotion. That is leadership under pressure. But The Godfather also warns us about something deeper. Power has a cost. The higher Michael rises, the more isolated he becomes, the more control he gains externally, the more disconnected he becomes internally. That is the hidden tragedy of the story. Success without balance slowly turns into loneliness. Michael becomes respected, feared, untouchable. But peace quietly disappears from his life. That contrast matters. Because the movie is not glorifying power blindly. It is showing the psychological weight attached to it. Every decision creates consequences. Every move creates enemies. Every act of control demands sacrifice. That is why discipline becomes essential. Undisciplined power destroys itself quickly. Disciplined power survives. The Corleone family survives because they understand strategy. They think long-term. They value loyalty, patience, and timing more than emotional reactions. That mindset separates leaders from impulsive people. Impulsive people react immediately. Strategic people observe first. Observation creates understanding. Understanding creates leverage. And leverage creates influence. That is why Vito rarely speaks more than necessary. Silence itself becomes part of his power, while others reveal emotions openly. He gathers information quietly. Most people underestimate silence. Silence allows you to think while others expose themselves emotionally. And in high-pressure situations, emotional control becomes a superpower. That is one of the deepest lessons in the movie. The person who controls themselves gains an advantage over the person controlled by anger, fear, or ego. Because emotional reactions are temporary. But strategic decisions shape the future permanently. Michael eventually masters this mindset completely. He becomes patient, calculated, and emotionally unreadable. Every move feels controlled. Every decision feels intentional. And honestly, that level of discipline is terrifying. Because the movie shows how dangerous a calm, intelligent, emotionally controlled person can become. But it also asks an important question. What happens when ambition consumes humanity? That question gives the story depth beyond crime and power. Because many people chase influence thinking it will bring freedom, but sometimes influence creates isolation instead. Sometimes protecting power costs peace. That is why The Godfather feels timeless. It is not really about crime. It is about control. Control over emotions. Control over decisions. Control over reactions under pressure. And ultimately, control over yourself. Because the person who cannot control themselves will eventually lose control over everything else too. That is the hidden philosophy running beneath The Godfather. Beneath the suits, power, money, and influence is a constant battle between emotion and discipline. And discipline always wins long term. In the world of the Corleone family, one emotional mistake can destroy years of strategy. One impulsive reaction can create consequences that spread across generations. That is why patience becomes more valuable than aggression. The calmest person often holds the most power because they are not reacting emotionally to every situation around them. Most people live the opposite way. Someone insults them, they react immediately. Something goes wrong, they panic immediately. Someone challenges their ego, they lose focus immediately. That lack of emotional control makes people predictable. Predictable people are easy to manipulate because their reactions are controlled by feelings instead of awareness. Vito Corleone understands this deeply. He never wastes energy trying to dominate every room loudly. He understands that true influence comes from presence, timing, and restraint. When he speaks, people listen because his words are measured carefully instead of thrown around emotionally. That restraint creates authority. And honestly, modern life lacks that kind of calm discipline. Today, everyone reacts instantly. Social media rewards emotional outbursts, impulsive opinions, and constant noise. People speak before thinking, post before reflecting, and argue before understanding. But The Godfather teaches a completely different mindset. Slow down. Observe first. Think clearly. Then act intentionally. That approach changes outcomes. Michael Corleone becomes the perfect example of this transformation. At first, he seems disconnected from the family's world, more emotional, more idealistic, more human in some ways, but pressure slowly reshapes him. And pressure reveals character. When life becomes difficult, people either become reactive or strategic. Michael becomes strategic. He learns how to hide emotion behind calm expression. He learns how to separate personal feelings from necessary decisions. He learns how to think several moves ahead instead of reacting to the current moment alone. That ability creates power. But it also creates distance. That is the tragedy hidden inside his evolution. The stronger he becomes externally, the colder he becomes internally. His discipline protects the family, but it slowly isolates him from peace, trust, and emotional connection. That contrast is important because the movie never presents power as simple. Power solves certain problems while creating others. Influence gives control, but it also creates responsibility and pressure that never fully disappear. That is why self-awareness matters so much. Without self-awareness, ambition becomes dangerous. People begin sacrificing everything for control without realizing what they are losing in the process. Status replaces peace. Fear replaces connection. Success replaces meaning. Michael achieves extraordinary influence, but emotionally he becomes trapped inside the role he created for himself. And honestly, many people experience smaller versions of this in real life too. They become so focused on achievement that they forget relationships. So focused on winning that they lose balance. So focused on appearing strong that they stop feeling understood. That is why The Godfather remains deeper than a crime story. It reflects human nature itself. The desire for respect, the fear of weakness, the temptation of power, and the constant challenge of maintaining your humanity while carrying responsibility. Because responsibility changes people. Once others depend on you, every decision carries weight. Every mistake becomes expensive. Every weakness becomes risky. That pressure can either sharpen wisdom or destroy peace depending on how it is handled. Vito handles it with patience. Michael handles it with control. But both men reveal something important. Leadership is lonely when emotional balance disappears. That lesson matters far beyond the world of mafia families. Business leaders, athletes, creators, entrepreneurs, anyone carrying responsibility faces similar psychological pressure. The higher people rise, the more important emotional discipline becomes. Not fake confidence. Not loud dominance. Internal stability. The ability to remain calm while others panic. The ability to think clearly while others react emotionally. The ability to make difficult decisions without losing direction. That is real control. And once you develop that level of control over yourself, external chaos stops controlling you so easily. Fear weakens, ego quiets down, reactions slow, decisions improve. At that point, power no longer comes from intimidation. It comes from presence, from clarity, from discipline strong enough to remain steady even when the entire world around you becomes chaotic. Because chaos tests people in ways comfort never can. Anyone can appear calm when life is easy, when situations are predictable, and when nothing important is at risk. But true character reveals itself under pressure. When emotions rise, stakes become dangerous, and decisions carry consequences that cannot be reversed. That is where The Godfather becomes more than a story about power. It becomes a study of human behavior under pressure. Every character faces moments where emotion tries to overpower judgment. Anger demands immediate action. Fear demands retreat. Ego demands revenge. But the people who survive longest are usually the people capable of delaying emotional reactions long enough to think clearly. That ability is rare. Most people are controlled by the moment directly in front of them. A temporary feeling changes a permanent decision. A short burst of anger damages years of progress. An emotional reaction destroys opportunities that patience could have protected. Vito Corleone understands that emotions are temporary but consequences are lasting. That is why he moves carefully, speaks carefully, and trusts patience more than impulse. He knows that discipline creates stability while emotional chaos creates vulnerability. Modern life constantly pushes people toward reaction instead of reflection. Everything moves faster now. Faster communication, faster opinions, faster pressure, faster comparison. People feel expected to respond instantly to everything, but speed without clarity often creates mistakes. That is why calmness becomes such an advantage. Calm people see situations others miss because panic narrows perspective while discipline expands it. When everyone else loses emotional control, the calm person gains strategic advantage simply by remaining steady enough to think. Michael eventually masters this completely. His emotions become controlled so deeply that even dangerous situations fail to shake his external composure. He learns how to sit silently while others expose weakness through emotional reactions. He understands that information is power, and emotional control protects information. But there is also something tragic hidden inside that mastery. The stronger his control becomes externally, the more isolated he becomes internally. His ability to suppress emotion protects his position, but it slowly distances him from warmth, trust, and vulnerability. That tension is what gives the story emotional depth. Because discipline without humanity eventually becomes coldness. And coldness may create fear, but it rarely creates peace. That is one of the deepest lessons in the film. Balance matters. Emotional control is powerful, but complete emotional detachment can slowly disconnect people from meaningful relationships and inner fulfillment. Many ambitious people experience this without realizing it. They become so focused on staying strong that they stop allowing themselves to feel openly. Vulnerability begins to look dangerous. Trust begins to feel risky. Eventually, they build walls so high around themselves that success becomes lonely. The movie quietly asks whether power is worth that cost. That question makes the story timeless because it applies far beyond organized crime. Anyone pursuing influence, leadership, or achievement faces similar tension between control and connection. The higher responsibility rises, the harder emotional balance becomes. That is why self-mastery matters more than external status. Without self-mastery, success magnifies weakness, money amplifies insecurity, influence amplifies ego, power amplifies emotional instability. But when discipline exists internally first, external success becomes easier to handle wisely. Vito represents controlled wisdom. Michael represents controlled ambition. Both are powerful, but they reveal different outcomes of discipline shaped by different motivations. And honestly, that contrast is fascinating because it mirrors real life. Some people use discipline to protect values, relationships, and long-term stability. Others use discipline purely to gain control, influence, and dominance. The external behavior may look similar, but internally the results become completely different. That is why intention matters. Discipline alone is not enough. The direction behind discipline determines whether it builds fulfillment or isolation. By the end of the story, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. External power means very little if internal peace disappears completely. Respect from the world cannot fully replace connection, trust, or emotional balance. And that realization changes how the audience sees everything. The movie begins looking like a story about influence and control. But underneath, it is really asking a much deeper question. Can someone become powerful without losing the part of themselves that still feels human?